We're going to start off with some interesting facts about Hawaii. In ancient Hawaii, you were not allowed to wear clothes until you turned the age of 8. Because when you received clothes, that was your indication that it was time to work. It was your time to start supporting your family. So children, it was often seen then as a sign of great freedom to see children playing around naked. And as soon as you saw a child get his first set of clothes, you knew that that began the rest of his life of hard work and labor and contribution to the tribe. It was seen as at the age of 8 was an age of viability, that you would be able to contribute meaningfully to your culture, meaningfully to your tribe, and especially to your family to help put bread on the table. Most people think that Texas is the widest state in the United States, but actually when measured from east to west, Hawaii is the widest state in the United States of America. Also, Hawaii is the only state in the United States that grows coffee. Hawaii produces about 320,000 tons of pineapple each year, very little of it which is eaten by Americans. Almost all of the pineapple crop from Hawaii goes to Japan or the other islands, whereas most of the pineapple we do get in the United States comes to us from Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. So we grow such great pineapples in Hawaii that we can't even afford to eat them ourselves. So we send them overseas, and then we purchase the pineapples from Central America. Hawaii is the only state in the Union whose land area is constantly increasing due to volcanic eruptions. And surprisingly, most people think that when they come to the Hawaiian Islands and they see rather large people, they think that Hawaii has a relatively low life expectancy, but actually Hawaii has the highest life expectancy in the entire United States. Life expectancy for males is 75, and for females, 80 years. And surprisingly, Hawaii has the fewest overweight people in the United States. So if you thought we were big in Hawaii, they get even bigger on the mainland. If you're looking for an affordable place to live, it's not Honolulu. It is the second most expensive city in the United States, just after Anchorage, Alaska. And mainly it's because everything has to be imported. From gas, petroleum products, everything that you could imagine, most of the food products, almost everything is imported to Hawaii. And again, most people think that it's Texas or Florida as the southernmost state in the Union, but actually Hawaii is the southernmost state in the United States of America. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Tahiti. Hawaii receives more visitors, more tourists in 10 days than Tahiti receives in an entire year. How many of you saw, well, almost all of you who went on board, you saw the tiare flower or even other flowers that the Polynesian girls will put above their ears? It's important to recognize that when you see these young girls wearing these flowers, if they put the flower behind their left ear, it means that they're taken. And they put it on the right side if they're looking for someone. So, if you saw a girl fidgeting with her flower while she was talking with you, she was either trying to tell you that she was single or she wasn't interested. Very interestingly, in Tahiti, is that over half the population of Tahiti is under the age of 20. So it's a reverse problem that Tahiti has, where in most of the world right now we have the majority of our population is over the age of 50. In Tahiti and in the surrounding islands, over half of the population is under the age of 20. So they're going to have a very strong workforce. The problem is, and something that they're really quite worried about in the Tahitian Islands, is that they have over a 40 to 60% unemployment rate in the islands. So consequently, they're looking at a generation that's much larger than the present generation with an increased level of unemployment. How many of you, when you were driving past the little houses in the Tahitian Islands, noticed little mailbox type houses? They had them generally, probably about one out of every 3 or 4 houses had these little mailboxes set outside. Well, they're actually not mailboxes at all. They're for French bread delivery. Twice a day, a truck will come by in Tahiti and and the other islands, and they'll actually drop off loaves of bread. Now, many houses still have these little boxes that look like mailboxes, but many people just walk out to the street to meet the driver for the bread. But they get bread delivered very early in the morning for their morning meal, and then they'll get another loaf of bread or two delivered in the afternoon for their evening meal. Tipping at restaurants in Tahiti, it's a little bit late in the game, but for those of you who are generous tippers on the islands, they thank you very much, but it wasn't necessary. It's not required or expected in the islands, and there's no sales tax in Tahiti either. There is the visitor's tax, the value-added tax, but not the sales tax. Tahitians are known to express themselves a great deal through dance, but they also have 7 different languages in the Tahitian islands. You can hear French, Tahitian, Marquesas, Tuamotu, Rutu, I should say, Tubai, and Mangareva on all of the islands. So for those people who visit the islands, it's sometimes very difficult because you hear different phrases. And that's because they really are combining up to 7 languages on the islands. Now we'll chat a little bit about Samoa. Even though Polynesia and most of Polynesian islands are very much a male-dominated society, in Samoa there's a great number of reversals, which is very curious to most of the Polynesian islands. So in Samoa, young men are in charge of the food. They're in charge of not only the gathering of the food, but also the cooking of the food as well. Samoans, for those of you who have been to Samoa, know that they're known as the happy people because of their enjoyment of life and their good-spirited nature. This is probably one of the most interesting pieces of Samoan culture, which has now permeated a great deal of Polynesian culture throughout the South Pacific. And they're called Fa'afafine. Now, Fa'afafine was considered the 3rd sex in the Polynesian island group. So you'll have male, female, and Fa'afafine. So when a family has too many boys in the family, what they'll do is they will take one of the boys, the youngest boy, and they will raise this boy as a girl. They'll actually change his name at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, change his male name to a female name, and they'll begin to treat him like a girl. And he'll also start to take on female responsibilities. Now there's the word Fa'afafine actually means in the manner of a woman. And it's very acceptable in Polynesian society, particularly in Samoa, to have a man who wears very feminine clothing, who does the women's work. And the reason they did was not only just to help out around the house, but also so that in old age, the parents would have at least one daughter who would stay and take care of the parents in old age. In some Samoan families, you'll have 2 or 3. Some Samoan families that are very large, with extended families, you may have 5 to 10 Fa'afafine in one family. Fa'afafine actually consider themselves to be much better than men and much better than women. They consider themselves to have the best of both worlds, particularly as it comes to household duties. When household duties are required, for example, cleaning around the house, maybe moving a sofa or moving the tables, the Fa'afafine have the strength of the man, but the sensibilities of a woman. So they're able to do all of this domestic labor, the hard domestic labor, and yet it doesn't tax them as it might a woman. So they consider themselves in many respects to be above an average man or woman in many chores. And as you'll see here, the Fa'afafine are even allowed to use the women's bathroom. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this later on because there's a great number of pieces that are very interesting about this that I want to share with you today. Little fast facts about Fiji. In ancient Fiji, all the boys would have their heads shaved when they were 5 years old, and they would keep their heads shaved up until they were 18. And this was a sign then that they were a man. You would be allowed to grow your hair at the age of 18. And this is often then in Fijian culture when you would also get your first tattoo. You would start working much before that time, but when you reached the age of 18, you were expected largely by that point in time to have earned your way through learning a trade or a craft. So by that point in time, by the time that you're 18, you should be able to contribute significantly. They allowed you up to the age of 18 to kind of float around, to learn a little bit about this trade and that trade, and to discover what you were really interested in. But at the age of 18, you were allowed to grow your hair out, and you were expected to pick a trade that would be meaningful to your family and would contribute in a significant way to your tribe. Fiji was one of the great practitioners of cannibalism. Until the mid-19th century, the practice of eating one's enemy was still a time-honored and very much accepted tradition in Fiji. Many of you have seen the Polynesian fire walking. While that's still done in many of the Polynesian cultures, it's still very much practiced today, not just for tourists, but actually as a tribal rite of passage, a rite of initiation in Fiji. For those of you who have been to Fiji, you know that they have stunning white sand beaches. Those are from the natural grinding down of dead coral. You'll see that a lot of the islands of the South Pacific are either the dark black sand from the volcanic or the white sand. There's very few in between. I got a great laugh out of this one. When I was talking with someone from Fiji many years ago, I noticed to them that they still had the Queen, even though that they were an independent country, they still have the Queen on their banknotes. And I asked one of the gentlemen that we were staying with, I said, why do you still have the Queen on your banknotes? And he said to me, well, we really wanted independence, but we're not quite sure we can make it on our own. So we thought we would keep the Queen's picture on it, just in case. And I thought that was genius. For those of you who don't know, Fiji is not a single island. It's two large islands, and then it has over 300 smaller islands. So when we talk about going to Fiji, it's actually a relatively widespread island group that comprised of two large islands and the smaller islands, 300 of them. Now we'll talk a little bit about tattoos. The word tattoo comes from the Tahitian word tatau. And some of the other Polynesian words actually are tatau. Before we go too much further into this, I want to make a special note today of a special someone in the audience who at the age of 86 received his very first tattoo. And that man is my father. He had wanted a tattoo for a good portion of his life, but my mother wasn't keen to the idea. And since Mom has been gone for 3 years now, Dad decided this was his time to get his tattoo. So at the ripe young age of 86, he went and got his first tattoo in Bora Bora. And I think it's been a big hit among the ladies too. Polynesian culture had no written language, so consequently, tattoo really helped the Polynesians communicate in unspoken ways. You were able to look at someone with tattoos and to know where they fit in the tribe, their importance to the society, their importance to their family, and it helped convey status, which is probably the most important factor in Polynesian culture. Additionally, in a culture that has mostly natural fibers, you're talking about flax and grasses and the coconut shells, without a lot of color except for the flowers, tattoos really allowed the men, in a very manly sort of a way, and even the women, to define themselves in their personality and their status and their interests through tattoo. In ancient Polynesia, almost everyone over the age of 12 had a tattoo. And the older you got, the greater status that you received in your tribe, the more tattoos that you would have. And in a video I'm going to show, it actually demonstrates that if you wanted to enter the house of the tribal leader, of the chief, or the ancient kings, if you wanted to even be in the king's presence, you had to have a tattoo. If you did not have a tattoo, it meant that you were not meaningfully connected to your tribe. So tattoos indicate the following about a person. They'll show status, where you fit in the tribal hierarchy. We'll talk about sexual maturity. So until you reach a sexual mature age, you might be able to get a tattoo at the age of 12, but it wouldn't be any of the potent tattoos for spiritual and sexual mana. Also genealogy. So when we talk about the chieftains of the tribes, you would not be able to get a tribal chieftain's tattoo unless you could prove your genealogy. So when one chief died and a new chief was being sworn in, when he was taking his pledge and his oath, he would receive at the same time a tattoo that would demonstrate his genealogy. So it was very clear then when he was walking through or when he was traveling to other places, they would be able to look at his tattoo at about waist level and lower and be able to tell that this was the chief because they were able to trace his genealogy back to the spirits. And then lastly, a tattoo would indicate your ability to work. If you were only 12 to 14, you would have a certain set of tattoos. And then as you would age, you would get more tattoos the more that you were able to prove yourself as a strong worker in your tribe. So really, you wanted to prove yourself. You wanted to work hard, because by receiving these tattoos, you proved your value to your tribe, you proved your value to your family, and you gave greater recognition to your family by receiving these tattoos. Polynesian people believe that a person's mana, their spiritual power, or their life force, is displayed through their tattoo. So, again, if you didn't have a tattoo, it means that you weren't connected to your gods or to your tribe in a meaningful way. It was necessary for you to have a tattoo. And I'm going to play for you a bit of a video about the tribal tattoo of Samoa, which I think is quite interesting, and it helps explain in a much stronger way the importance of tattoo in Polynesian culture.
The most important house is the chief's house.
This special house is the Mautoleli, which means the highest ranking chiefs presides over the affairs of his family, and this is his house. We have high chiefs. We call it Taboo, or the highest ranking chief in the village, and then we have Usoli, which is the lower ranking chiefs in the village. Chiefly tattoos completes the attires of the chiefs. Tattoo comes from the word tatau, which signifies honor, strength, virtue of Samoa. It started from the 1400s when we started the art of tattoo. If you were to have the interest of learning the culture, you must have a tattoo to come in the chief's house. We Samoans tattoo from our waist all the way down to our knees. Usually it takes 1 to 2 weeks. Because it's so painful, they're applied by section. Through the process, you lose a lot of blood. As we go to the ocean and wash off the blood and try to massage our body and help relax the muscles, and the salt water, we believe that helps heal the tattoo. And the first part of the tattoo would be the va'a. Va'a signifies our canoes of Samoa, the knowledge of the ocean. Right here on my rib cage here will be the rafter of this chief's house. That signifies unity in our family and signifies honor. Then we go down to our lower part of the tattoo and down to our knees. The Samoa is right below the knee. The last portion of the tattoo is the punyalo. Then that completes your attire as a chief. We believe that after being tattooed, you should be a better man. You should, all your affairs, all your dealings with your people should be in honesty and integrity. We have instruments that apply the ink to our body. This is hautapulu, which is made out of the incisors of the wild boar that is fastened to a piece of turtle shell, an instrument to apply the ink in the large dark side of the tattoo. This is a sausau used to apply this instrument to your body with the ink. The hausongi asola poa, which is to apply the bigger rafters. And then we have the hausongi asola iti, is to apply rafters or lines of the tattoo. And then we have the aumono right here, used to apply the small markings. The ink comes from the canoe nut. We call it lama in Samoa. So the tattoo, therefore, it's our identity as Samoans. It's an honor for you as a young man to go through that tattooing. It elevated your status in the community, in the Council of Chiefs, and your family or your ainga. And that's the tattoo of Samoa, or the tau.
So for 180 years, once the missionaries arrived, it was forbidden to get a tattoo. It was forbidden to even speak of tattoos. And many people who had tattoos were actually ostracized during this period when the missionaries arrived. So it was only then during the 1980s, not too long ago, that tattoo actually reemerged in a great deal of Polynesian culture. And it was because it would have been preserved in so many of the small islands. And the major islands where the missionaries had come and spent time, tattoo was no longer practiced. But when the reemergence, when they realized that they wanted to really re-embrace their culture again, they started bringing tattoo artists from the other parts of the South Pacific to help them learn again and to re-understand the methods of tattoo. And so in many small islands, it's also by the health authorities. You can't do for example, in Tahiti, you can't do the traditional old-style tattoos. It's forbidden to do that by the health codes. However, in some of the other islands, in Samoa and some of the other smaller islands, you can still do some of these traditional methods. However, it's very, very painful. I got the first part of a tattoo using that method, and it took about 2.5 hours for the first portion of it. And when they told me that they could do the rest of that tattoo in about 1.5 hours, I quickly switched for the needle to finish the job quicker. I really didn't have it in me to spend an entire day getting the tattoo in the old traditional manner because it is terribly painful. But it's quite an honor to be able to receive a traditional tattoo in Polynesia. Okay, I often get asked about sex in the South Pacific. Those people who have seen the movies always want to know about the interesting tidbits about sex and sex lore in the South Pacific. So we're going to skip right over that. No, sorry. So early sailors from Europe, when they came on their ships, they regarded Polynesia as a sexual paradise. For them, they couldn't believe that when they arrived in their ships, that these beautiful girls, particularly when they came to the Marquesas, which was where a lot of the stories come from, that these girls would come out to the boats and just be interested in little more than a sexual tryst with the sailors. Now, while the sailors were very excited about this, the missionaries that they were bringing with them thought just the opposite. They thought that it was an awful influence, and their whole aim was to try to convince them that this was the wrong way. So I'll read this here. The 1778 report from J. Forster, who was an early missionary, said, "The great plenty of good and nourishing food, together with fine climate, the beauty and unreserved behavior of their females, invite them powerfully to the enjoyments and pleasures of love. They begin early to abandon themselves to the most libidinous scenes." So this is what the missionaries thought. And quite honestly, sexual experience and expression for many Polynesians began very early and continued throughout their life. This was something that they did not regard as a topic to be avoided, something that shouldn't be discussed. It was very much a part of their culture. And they felt no shame in talking about it or in performing sexual acts openly. So the difference here, though, is that the young European men who came over, they really didn't know how to respond to these girls because they weren't like the prostitutes they'd seen in other areas where they'd have to go and pay money and negotiate the price. Here, these girls just came out and offered it to them freely. So it was a very unique experience for them, and it caused many of these men to change their entire views about Polynesia. And in many respects, it put them in a great deal of danger because Polynesian cultures were still very much involved in cannibalism. So they revered these white sailors because they were able to travel. They were great seamen. They felt that they must have been strong warriors. And so they looked up at them as having great spiritual mana, great spiritual power. But by the same token, they also understood that in order for them to get that spiritual power, they would have to eat them. So consequently, you have on one hand, man's desire to avoid getting killed and eaten, and on the other side, the desire to have sex with beautiful women. Guess which one went out? In Polynesian culture, sexual restrictions appeared to be non-existent. There appeared to be absolutely no sexual norms, no sexual mores whatsoever. But quite honestly, it was because the Europeans didn't understand it. There is a very strong implied social system that the European sailors didn't see, and they simply didn't understand. The young girls that came to the boats to have sex with these sailors were outside of the tapu or the taboo classes. So they weren't bound by status or rank. These were not women that were married. These were not women that were the daughters of the chiefs. They were not involved in any meaningful way in the tribal culture. So they were outside of the ranks of tapu. They were not endowed yet with the spiritual graces. So in order for them to get that spiritual grace, they had to have relations with the sailors. So it wasn't just that they were libidinous young women who wanted to have sex with these sailors. The simple truth is they saw the sailors as a means to an end. The sailors, in fact, gave them, by being with them sexually, gave them some of their spiritual power and allowed them to rise up in rank inside of their tribe. So when a girl would go out to the boat and have a tryst with a sailor, and if she would be so lucky as to have a baby by this sailor, then she would be carrying the son or the daughter of what they would perceive as a great leader, a person with great spiritual power. So it would raise them up in the tribal status. So it's not just about what they saw. What the sailors saw is what they wanted to see. Beautiful young girls coming out to have relations with them. But the simple truth is that these girls wanted these relations because they knew that long after these men had come and gone, that they would still be able to reap the benefits in their tribe of having a higher social status and also the wealth that came along with it. How many of you heard the story about the nails on the ships? Okay, a few of you. I'm going to go ahead and tell it because I think it's an interesting story that gives you an idea of how they viewed these sailors. So when the girls would come out to the boats, what they would be doing is while they were engaging in a little bit of teasing with the men, they would be looking around for things. They'd be checking to see what they had on the boats, to see if there was anything that they could use. Well, they realized very short on that the nails that they had on board in the carpentry shop could be used as fishing hooks. Well, the Polynesians had only used bone, which became very brittle. So you could only catch maybe one or two fish with it, and then it would break off. And then they'd have to go back to whittling either a new wooden hook or a new bone hook, and it took a long time to do this. Well, when they saw that these men had these great amounts of these nails that could be bent and sharpened and filed down and used as fishing hooks, and they could use them for months and years, this became an incredible piece of information that they wanted to take back to the tribe. And if they were able to bring back these fishing hooks to the tribe, these girls then would rise up in status among their tribe. So the girls then would start doing trades. So they would have sex with the men in exchange for the nails. And sooner, after a while, after a couple of months, they started realizing that all of the nails that they had in the carpentry shop were starting to disappear. And they were looking to make repairs on the boat, and they didn't have any more nails. Well, it got even worse when they started seeing the floorboards coming up. So the men would actually pull up the floorboards and pull up the nails just so that they could continue to have sex with these beautiful women. And it only stopped. Matter of fact, some of the captains even threatened flogging, and they would flog the men for pulling it up. And guess what still won out? The men would still take the floggings as long as they were able to continue to have their relationships with these women. It was only until the captains actually shot and killed a man and then continued to threaten violence or death to the sailors that they finally realized, you know what, as much as this might be a pleasurable experience, it's not worth my life. And so they stopped it. But you can see how this became a trading experience. It became a bartering. And they were very willing to barter what they had for what they needed. Ancient Polynesia, according to the missionaries, was known for public copulation, erotic festivals, ceremonial orgies, and sex expeditions, which had all but disappeared by modern times. So what appeared as an absence of cultural rules was actually just the opposite. And as we know, some things never change. It was primarily the young and unmarried people who had the greatest sexual freedom. Married people and the elite class had much less sexual freedom. But now you've heard about the stories of a tribal chieftain offering his wife or his daughter to the visitors. The wives and the daughters were generally only offered to the chiefs. They were not offered to the common sailor. And it was only done so once or twice as a welcome. It was not a continuing gesture. So for a chief to welcome another chief as he would perceive him. He would offer his wife or his daughter for the first week or so. And then afterwards, they would work on really trying to set this chief up with another woman in the tribe so that they could continue to spread this spiritual power. And that was part of actually the concern when we heard yesterday about the mutiny on the Bounty, was that Captain Bligh really didn't want to participate in any of this. So he perceived himself as outside, and that's what created some of the social conflict. His men were very much involved in contributing their mana to the tribe. But imagine now if you were the great tribal chieftain, and you had invited another chief to have sexual relationships with your wife or with your daughter or with any other women in the tribe, and he said no. What he was effectively saying was, I want to keep my mana to myself. I want to keep my power. And so he wasn't perceived as being a part wanting to share. So it created a great deal of difficulties in the tribes because of Captain Bligh's refusal to have relationships on a meaningful level with the women of the tribe. Now we'll talk a little bit about the Fa'afafine. Fa'afafine, this word comes to us from Samoa, which means in the manner of a woman. And these are biological males who have a strong feminine gender orientation. Now, whether by nature or by nurture, these are boys who turn into men who are raised as women and who consider themselves as women. Parents recognize the sexual orientation very early on, sometimes as young as 6 years old. And then the boy is raised as a Fa'afafine, which is the third gender. So it's not just male and female. It's male, female, and Fa'afafine, which is a distinct gender role. So the reasons for the Fa'afafine. They recognized early on that there was the natural predisposition of some boys, but they also recognized that some families simply did not have enough women to do the work, to do the household work. So they would start to raise a young boy as a daughter so that they could keep up with the household work. And keep in mind that the boys in the family also did the cooking, but it was the women who did the cleaning and the caring for the children and also the caring for the elders. Polynesia is a very macho culture, and so surprisingly, the Fa'afafine still enjoys widespread recognition. There isn't a problem among, like we see in a lot of our cultures today, where they might consider them gay or effeminate, and then they would talk down to them or they would be physically threatened. It was very much accepted and still is to this day, especially in Samoa where it's most prevalent. Fa'afafine is not something that people hide or something, they don't talk about it much, so when you go on the islands you won't have people talking about it generally, but it's not something that they hide either. As a matter of fact, in the Tahitian island groups, Fa'afafine are school principals, they're bank managers, they're business owners, they're involved in almost every facet of life, and they're very politically empowered as well. For those of you who went to some of the cultural centers, particularly some of the areas where they had arts and crafts, you would have seen very large men dressed as women who would have been doing a lot of the crafts. They're very much involved in the crafts in a much greater way than many Polynesian women. So Fa'afafine are known for the way they looked after their households, especially their parents. This is the interesting part for a lot of people. They have a varied sexual life. Now, the video that you're going to see, they'll say that they only have sex with other Fa'afafines, but the truth is that in many tribes, Fa'afafines will have sex with men, with women, and with other Fa'afafines. But in a lot of tribes, they'll say that they only have sex with straight men. So a sexual relationship, even though it's a biological male, if that biological Fa'afafine, the male, is having sex with another man, it's not considered a homosexual relationship. It's considered a heterosexual relationship in Polynesian society. But it only goes so far. While it's recognized as a heterosexual relationship and a straight man can have a Fa'afafine girlfriend, you may not get married. It's still not recognized as a legal union. But that change, I believe, is coming. Now is a little bit of a video about the Fa'afafine.
We never consider ourselves gay. We're Fa'afafine to us, because we never go having sex with another Fa'afafine. We only go for straight men.
It's a puzzle to outsiders how Fa'afafine have the body of men, yet identify as female, and have sex with men, but are not gay. The key to this puzzle is in the bonds that tie Samoan society together.
Gender roles, even sexual desire, is shaped to suit society. That means gender identity is often hugely shaped by culture. Being a woman in Samoa is quite different from being a woman in Western society.
For Samoans, the group, the village and extended family is more important than the individual. And your role in that group decides your gender more than your individual anatomy. Act like a woman, and the group will consider you a woman, which is why sex between a Fa'afafine and a man is regarded as a heterosexual relationship. But the main reason Fa'afafine are not considered taboo is because society sanctions their very existence. By deciding their child lives as a Fa'afafine, a family gives them a place and a role in the all-important group in Samoan society.
I was raised by my grandmother as a Fa'afafine.
Most of the family over here in Samoa, they have at least 1 or 2 Fa'afafine in the family. My family, it's about 7 or more. We still see some younger ones coming up, and nobody can stop it.
But not all young boys willingly submit to life as a Fa'afafine.
I would never. Never.
Let me try this on your hair.
I'm a boy. No, you are mom.
This third gender is often welcome in extended families because Fa'afafine play a useful role in household labor. Their male bodies provide extra muscle power. Work roles are clearly defined by gender in Samoan society. Domestic tasks are regarded as women's work. And when there are not enough girls to help around the house, often the only answer is to raise a male child as a girl to do these chores. Fa'afafine consider themselves better than men or women at domestic skills.
If you cook with a Fa'afafine, I think a Fa'afafine will be better than you. If you're cleaning or doing all this kind of stuff that a woman should do, a Fa'afafine is better than a woman for doing it.
So that's a little insight into the Fa'afafine. Now we're going to talk about taboo in Polynesian culture. So what is taboo? Taboo actually comes to us from the Polynesian word tapu, because as you know, in the Polynesian language, the letter B doesn't exist. So it comes from the word tapu, which means that it has great spiritual power or mana and should be avoided at all costs. So it can actually be dangerous for you if you do not avoid things that are taboo. So since power from the gods, this mana, is invisible, but also potentially dangerous, Polynesian societies that it would just be plain silly to mess around with it, to meddle with it. So consequently, you avoided all things that were taboo. People and places known to be filled with mana were potentially dangerous to the average person. So such places and such people became taboo. So again, this is a way of organizing society. The chiefs were generally able to go almost anywhere, the lower chiefs almost everywhere, but it kept the lower people at the lower stratus of society very much in line by telling them, these places are off limits, these people are off limits. You don't talk to them, you don't question them, and you certainly don't go to where they live. So it kept a very ordered society. Cemeteries, for example, are places that are considered taboo for the layman, and often many chiefs stay away from cemeteries as well because it's a god taboo. It's some place that you don't go because you can't control the taboo. It's not a cultural taboo, it's a god taboo. Taboo also surrounds kings who have great power, great mana. Polynesian kings were so taboo that the ordinary citizens could not touch them, could not eat anything that they had touched, or even eat food from a field from where a king had walked. And it got to be so crazy at one point in Hawaii that the king wasn't able to go anywhere because the dirt, the air, the sun, everything that surrounded him, if it came into contact with him, became taboo for the ordinary person. So it crippled Hawaiian society. So one of the kings actually noticed that this had started to cripple their society, had kept people away, had really decimated a great deal of the productivity in the tribes because they were so busy following all of these norms, they were following all of their taboos, that the work wasn't getting done. So the king went out one day and he touched everything. He went through people's homes and he walked through and people were going crazy. But he would walk through and he would touch the water, he would touch the ground, he would touch the doors of their homes, touching everything so that they couldn't possibly avoid it. And then when they realized that they were still going to be able to live after they had touched these things that the king had touched, the taboo was lifted. So the king had effectively said, I'm lifting this taboo so we can get things back to normal. Is taboo still practiced today? And the answer is yes. In Nuku'alofa in Tonga, in 2006, the king of Tonga died. And the men who had to take care of his body, there were 40 men, undertakers. These men were sequestered after the funeral, and they were not allowed to use their hands for 90 days. So these are the men who are called Nima Tapu, which means sacred hands. They were put into a special house. They were fed. They were bathed. They were cleaned. Everything was done for them for 90 days to 100 days so that they would be able to, so the taboo would be lifted. Now, in old times, if this had been done, much like in the old, with the pharaohs, if a king had died or a chief had died, the undertakers would have been sacrificed and killed, or their hands would have been cut off. Any part that had touched the king would have been cut off. And the same thing happened in ancient Egyptian cultures as well, where the people who took care of the king after burial, they were sacrificed and then buried along with the king as well. Before we talk about the Kava ceremony, I actually want to talk about a time that I was in Tonga, and the king was actually riding on his bike through the streets. And while he was on his bike, he had a special bike made for him because he was such a big guy. He had 2 bike seats, one to hold each butt cheek, so that when he went down the road that he could actually keep balance. And the guys were actually running alongside of him, holding his bike so that he wouldn't fall over. But before they would turn the corner and come down the street, he would actually wait at the corner, and then the guards would run ahead and they would clear the streets, so that you would have to be on the other side of where the sun was shining so that the shadow wouldn't hit you as you were going down the street. So they would tell everyone on the right, if the sun was coming from this way, they would tell everyone on the right side to get on the other side of the street because the king was coming down, and that way the shadow wouldn't hit them and they wouldn't have to be sequestered for 90 to 100 days. So it still happened. That was in 1992, and this practice of the Nima Tapu still happened in 2006, and it's still actively practiced today in Tonga. How many of you are familiar with the Kava ceremony? Okay, a lot of you. I had, when I lived in Fiji for a bit, the first night that I was welcomed into the tribe, we had the Kava ceremony. I had no idea what it was about, and when I woke up from it a day and a half later, I couldn't believe that I had actually slept for almost 26 hours. But it acts as, it's the kava plant that is effectively crushed into a powder, and they take a pair of women's nylons or pantyhose, and they put it in there, and then they mix it with water, and they knead it back and forth, and it forms this chalky residue type drink. It's not very nice to taste, but I guess it's like a lot of hard liquor. You get the first couple down, and the rest go down a lot more smoothly. It's the same thing with this, except it starts to numb your body. So they pass it around, and they would clap their hands like this each time that would be passed around, and you couldn't just pass the cup. When it came to you, we're all drinking from the same cup. So when it was your turn, you would tip the cup up and you drink it, and then they would clap, and then it would go back and it would be passed around. So as the night wore on, the other elders of the tribe started to go away, to go back home. I think they'd been through it enough times. And so you continue passing this cup around. So where it had started off with 12 or 15 people, it was now down to 4 or 5 people, and we didn't have the sense to walk away. Not only did we not have the sense, but after 4 hours, I couldn't get up. I physically could not stand up. So at the end of the night, they had to actually lift me up and take me to my mat in my family's house, where I stayed for a full 26 hours. And I can't even begin to tell you how much I had to pee the next day. After going literally for 26 hours and having drank for 4 hours, it was unbelievable, and it's painful. So it's something now that in society they use this. The word for covenant in Tonga is fuakava. And so it's a way of forming a covenant. When you invite someone to your house, you have this kava ceremony. But it's become an excuse now in many of the tribes for drinking. And it's gone to excesses. It's ruined a lot of marriages. It's ruined a lot of job opportunities for men who have simply, much like alcohol, have taken it very, very seriously, and they drink way too much. Okay, let's talk about Tonga. Well, we talk about how sex is very open in most of Polynesian culture. In Tonga today, it's very restricted. It is actually dangerous today in Tongan society to have an open discussion about sex, especially in the company of women, and especially in the company of women in one's family. Historically, severe beatings and even some cases death have come as a result of people who mistakenly begin to talk about sex in a family setting around women. Imagine how difficult it is today in these islands that receive satellite television from Australia, from Europe, from the United States, and how permeated it is in our culture, and that these young people who are growing up today see all of these signs and signals, and they hear all of this conversation about sex, but they're not able to discuss it. It's creating a very difficult environment in Tonga. And I'll close with talking a little bit about magic in the South Pacific. The magical arts are based on two very different principles, and we don't think about much magic happening in the South Pacific. But magic, very much like voodoo and incantations, is still widely practiced in the South Pacific. So one of the rules is that supernatural power can be transmitted by touch. Much like a bishop laying on of hands, and we think that we get the blessing or the power from God. In the same way, these spiritual shamans would actually put their hands and they would transfer the magic or transfer the power. So you would be able to take your mana, your spiritual power, and by laying of hands and praying, you would be able to give someone else your spiritual power. And that was considered mana. Now keep in mind, it's not just giving someone spiritual power. You could also give someone dangerous mana. You could give someone too much, or you could give someone a curse, and that could be transmitted by touch. The second principle is called sympathetic magic. So we're familiar with this in some Asian cultures as well. Phallic-shaped roots will cure male impotence. Red beet juice is good for the blood because it looks like blood. Walnuts are said to be good for the brain because they look like the brain. And herbs with yellow sap can cure jaundice. So it's by looking at this that we can see the properties of these elements of nature that we're able to use this and to incur a curse or some sort of magic. And believe it or not, in 2006 in Papua New Guinea, two brothers were actually found guilty and were sentenced to 3 years in prison for using sorcery to cause someone else's death. All that they needed to prove in the court was that these brothers had aspired and had committed a touch of another person, and by that touch, they had given him a curse which led to his death. And these brothers spent 3 years in prison. Now, religion in Polynesia. We talk about what do Polynesians believe is the afterlife. Polynesians believed that there was a heaven. They didn't necessarily believe in a hell, but they believed, and this is very different from our beliefs. So we take a look at our beliefs and we say, if you live a good life, you'll go to heaven. But if you live a bad life, you might see the opposite. But for Polynesians, this wasn't about whether or not you acted good or you acted poorly. This was about your status in life. So if you were a chief, if you were born into the priestly caste, it was decided from very early on that you were going to be going to this special island, this special place on the western horizon where all the great spirits lived, your ancestors lived. But if you were born into the lower castes, you would not be going there. You would be going to another place which is directly underneath the ocean. And this place wasn't as happy a place as the Paradise Island. And so it was believed that the ghosts of commoners, the ghosts of the average person, they weren't particularly satisfied where they were underneath the ocean, so they would come back and visit their tribal kinsmen. So you had to do a very thorough job of burying someone and doing all of the prayers to make sure that that person never came back to haunt you as a ghost. But keep in mind now, again, how this impacts all of Polynesian society. It didn't matter what you did to get you to this place of spiritual reward. It mattered about the kind of power that you had. So now it gives us the reasoning behind the killing. It gives us a reason behind the eating of the organs. And it gives us a reason why people would do almost anything to get to that next level of spiritual power. Not only would you be imbued with greater power and opportunity in this world, but if you did not achieve a level of spiritual grace, of spiritual power and mana in this world, you wouldn't be able to go on to the spiritual paradise in the next world. So you'd be trapped in the world of commoners. So it was this constant struggle that the only way you could really get out of this was by acquiring another person's mana or by doing things that would allow you to get this mana. Some mana was able to be received by acts, but for the most part, it was simply predetermined when you were born by your genealogy, the kind of life that you would have. So, in that same way that the funeral rituals ensured then that people were buried properly so that they would never come back and return as a ghost.